First question. The French East India Company was founded in dash CE. The answer there is 1664. Second, the important governor of the French in India was Dupleix, Dupleix. Third, name 4 trading centers of the French in India. Answer, the important trading centers of the French were Surat, Mahe, Calicut, Karaikal, Pondicherry, Masulipattnam and Chandranagar. I have mentioned the important trading centers. Now from these you can mention any 4 of the following. Okay. What were the causes for the decline of French in India? First point, lack of proper support to the French commanders by the government. Second point, war with the neighboring country and revolutions led to their decline in India. Third point, the British Navy was stronger than the French Navy. And the last point, the French lost the trading centers except Pondicherry, Mahe and Karaikal. So, you have to write this answer point-wise if asked in your exam or your test. We'll move on to the next question. Arrange the following events in chronological order. The first one you will mention is capture of Constantinople. Second is discovery of new sea route to India. Third, the Portuguese were forced out of India. And the last one, the Dutch East India Company was formed. So this is the correct chronological order. So please check your answers. Next question is, mark the following on an outline map of India. So you can check your answers. I have put up the map to your left. Goa, Calcutta, Karaikal, and then capital of the French, which is nothing but Pondicherry. I hope you've all written your answers correctly. We'll now move on with today's class. Today, we will complete 3 lessons: Directive Principles of State Policy, Constitutional Amendment and Defense Forces. As few topics under these lessons are deleted for this academic year, I have combined the 3 lessons together. So let's get started. Directive Principles of State Policy is the first lesson that we will be doing now. So under this chapter, that is Directive Principles of State Policy, we will be learning about the meaning of the Directive Principles of State Policy, importance of Directive Principles of State Policy, and the advantages of Directive Principles of State Policy in establishing a welfare nation. So these are the main topics that we will be covering under this chapter. Meaning of Directive Principles of State Policy. Our Constitution has directed the state to follow some principles in order to achieve the ideal welfare state. So we learned what is Constitution, right? You had a separate chapter. So under that we have discussed a lot of things under our Constitution, correct? So the Constitution has directed the state to follow certain principles so that our state can achieve better, can be developed. These directive principles are called as the directive principles of the state. Our government is expected to keep these principles in view while administrating the state. These are the indicators for the development of India. Next, importance of the directive principles of the state policy. The directive principles of state policy are the directions given to the central and the state government by the Constitution. I'm sure you all remember in your 6th standard textbook, you have had the government chapter, right? So under that, you have learned the functioning of the central government, the state government, isn't it? So this is all about it. The directive principles of state policy are the directions given to both the central and the state government by the Constitution. It is necessary to adopt these principles while legislating, formulating, and implementing these policies. You know what is legislating, right? To make the laws. And then you know what is executive, right? They execute the laws that are being legislated. So, it is necessary to adopt these principles while legislating, formulating, and implementing these policies. The directive principles of state policy are important in achieving freedom, equality, and brotherhood to establish a welfare state. We have learnt a lot about rights and other things when we have learnt about the fundamental rights and duties, isn't it? The directive principles of state policy included in the Constitution are as follows. First is social justice. Next, social justice to the weaker sections. Third, women and child welfare. Fourth, labor welfare. Fifth, aid to the helpless. Next, uniform code of law to all. Prohibition of liquor, agriculture and association of animal husbandry, environment, protection of historical monuments, international peace and security. So, the directive principles of state policy, that is, these are the directive principles of state policy that are included in the Constitution. Okay? Let us learn about each one of them. Social justice. To achieve public welfare by dividing social, economic, and political justice to the citizens. Social justice is to achieve public welfare by dividing social, economic, and political justice to the citizens. This means protection of all the people without discrimination based on caste, religion, gender, language, color, region, and status. And treating everyone as equal is known as social justice. Let us repeat. Protection of all the people without discrimination based on caste, religion, gender, language, color, region, and status, and treating everyone as equal is known as social justice. Provisions such as eradication of bonded labor, exploitation of children, and equal rights to women and respecting them are also included under social justice. We have learnt about the same under fundamental rights and duties. I hope you all remember. This chapter links a lot to Constitution and fundamental rights and duties. Social justice to the weaker sections. It is intended to provide basic needs to the weaker sections to find remedy against economic exploitation, providing free education and extending free legal aid to them. Here, economic exploitation is underpaying the employees by extracting a lot of work from them and not paying them the right wages. Women and child welfare. Equal wages to both men and women for the same work. So in a few places what happens is women is paid lesser than the men. That's not right, isn't it? Because women are also doing the same amount of work as the men. So it's important that both of them are paid equal. Then maternity benefit to women. Prevention of exploitation of children. Facility for children to grow healthy in addition to providing free and compulsory education. So all of these points fall under women and child welfare. Okay. Next is labor welfare. Under that, looking after the welfare of labor, right to work, providing conducive atmosphere to work. So conducive atmosphere is providing the right conditions to work. They should feel comfortable. Next, minimum wages to workers. They cannot give very less amount for their work. So they have to be paid properly such that they are able to fulfill their needs. And providing them opportunity to participate in the administration. So all of these points fall under labor welfare. After that, we have the aid to the helpless. The government aid for the aged, patients and the unemployed to live. So this aid is nothing but providing assistance. It could be legal assistance, it could be financial assistance. Okay, so that is aid. So aid to the helpless, wherein the government aid for the aged, patients and the unemployed to live. We then move on with uniform code of law to all. This means to enforce uniform civil law to all the citizens. So law is the same for all the citizens of India. So that is uniform code of law to all. Next, prohibition of liquor. Drinking spoils one's health. It leads to financial problems in the family and increased exploitation of women. Therefore, the Constitution has directed all the state governments to enforce prohibition of liquor. Next, agriculture and association of animal husbandry. Under that, the state government should make an attempt to organize agriculture and animal husbandry in modern and scientific manner. You all know what agriculture is, and animal husbandry here is also a branch of agriculture that is concerned with animals that are raised for meat, fiber, milk, eggs, or any other products from them. So it includes day-to-day care. So here the state government should make an attempt to organize modern agricultural techniques and to implement them in a scientific manner in order to protect the unique species, prevent the slaughter of cattle, calf, and other animals which give milk and pull heavy luggage. So that's about agriculture and association of animal husbandry. Environment, protection of environment and wildlife, then protection of environment from pollution of industries and mines and protect the wildlife. Next, protection of historical monuments, protecting the historical places and monuments, for example, Hampi, Belur, Halebedu, Pattadakallu, and other historical sites. So it's very important to protect our historical sites. So this is also a directive principle. Okay. Next is international peace and security. Participation of the country in safeguarding international peace and security is a very important principle. With that, we complete directive principles of state policy. Let us look into the important points to remember. The Constitution has directed the state to follow some principles in order to achieve the ideal welfare state. These directive principles are called as directive principles of state. Our government is expected to keep these principles in view while administrating the state. These are the indicators for the development of India. Importance of the directive principles of state policy. The directive principles of the state policy are the directions given to the central and the state government by the Constitution. It is necessary to adopt these principles while legislating, formulating, and implementing these policies. The directive principles of state policy are important in achieving freedom, equality, and brotherhood and establish a welfare state. We now move on to the assignment section. Answer the following. What are the directive principles of state policy? And what is the aim of social justice? I am also giving you a small activity here. What measures can be initiated for effective implementation of right to education for children? So this is an activity for you. You can just think and write what you feel about the measures that can be initiated for implementation of right to education. Okay? I wouldn't be giving the answer for activity, of course, in the next session. But you can just think and write of what you feel. That's it. If you remember, under Constitution chapter, we learnt what is a constitution, right? A constitution means a set of basic rules followed by a country. I repeat, a constitution means a set of basic rules followed by a country. It is a reference guide to the government. What is the need for a constitution, children? We have learnt about this, isn't it? A constitution is important as it protects individual freedom and its fundamental principles. So, a constitution is a set of laws for how a country should be governed. So, hence, constitution is very, very important. Today, the second chapter that we will be doing is constitutional amendment. What is an amendment? An amendment is called a correction. Okay, an amendment is essentially a correction. It is an alteration made to a constitution. Now we already have the constitution, isn't it? We all know that there is a lot of changes taking place in our society. There are day-to-day changes. So there would be certain rules that were made. For example, in 1947 we got our independence. So at that point of time, our lifestyle, our society was different, and now our society is different. Every day we are able to see changes, isn't it? So when we keep that in mind, the constitution which was made then cannot be retained even after the society has undergone changes, correct? It might need a few changes. So when these changes are made to the constitution, it is called the constitutional amendment. That is, certain corrections made to the pre-existing constitution. I hope I have made it clear. So, an amendment is essentially a correction and it is an alteration made to a constitution. Right? Then you might have a question. What is the difference between law and an amendment? Okay, so a law forms the rules and regulations issued by the government. I repeat, a law forms the rules and regulations that are issued by the government. And what is an amendment? An amendment is the corrections or the alterations made to a law for the betterment. So the law is already there, the law is already made, but then the law that was there before 10 years cannot be retained even in today's lifestyle or today's society. Okay, so this law might need a few corrections. So that is called as an amendment. Okay. What is a constitutional amendment? So we learnt what is a constitution separately. We learnt what is an amendment separately. Now we will learn what is a constitutional amendment. Here, the formal or official changes or modifications made to a constitution is called as constitutional amendment. Let's repeat. The formal or official changes or modifications made to a constitution is called a constitutional amendment. Keep in mind, children, here we are not making laws. We are just correcting them with reference to the changing society. That's all. Okay. already a constitution is there, but only if needed you can make alterations to it. You are just amending it. Okay, so that is constitutional amendment. Need for a constitutional amendment. The provision of amendment is made in the Constitution for including certain changes in accordance with the changing society and situation. So, amendments are made in the Constitution such that it can satisfy the changing demands of the society and can adapt itself with the changing needs of the people. In this way, it can maintain its flexibility. The constitution makers felt that it has to be in accordance with people's aspirations and changes in society. They did not see it as an unalterable law. So they made provisions to incorporate changes from time to time. And these changes were called the constitutional amendments. Next, structure of the Constitution. The structure of the Constitution can be decided based on amendments. In case the amendment, that is the correction that has to be done, is easy, it is called a flexible constitution. And in case the amendment is difficult, it is called a rigid constitution. I repeat, if the amendment is easy, it is a flexible constitution, and if the amendment is difficult, it is called a rigid constitution. And this Constitution of India is a combination of both rigid and flexible factors. Now, what is this flexible constitution? A constitution that can be changed without great difficulty. So here, this constitution may be amended by the ordinary process of legislation and is therefore easy to amend. When you take the rigid constitution, a large number of people have to agree for it. Okay? It needs consent of majority of them. For example, it's not easy to make changes in fundamental rights and duties given or the directive principles of the state. So, when they have to make changes to that, majority of them have to agree. Like members of the parliament, or it could be consent from half of the states. Okay, so it becomes very difficult because everybody would have their opinion, and only when they have certain numbers that people have agreed, only then there would be changes to rigid constitution. Otherwise, it is not easy like the flexible constitution. So that's the difference between flexible and rigid constitution. Changes can be made easily under flexible constitution, but when it comes to rigid, there are certain departments under that where you cannot change it that easily. Okay, because it requires the consent of a large set of people. So only after all of them agree, there can be small corrections made to that. Okay, so our constitution is a combination of both flexible factors and rigid factors. So that's about the structure of our constitution. Methods of amending a constitution. So there are three methods of amending a constitution. Amendment by simple majority, then amendment by special majority, and the last one is amendment by special majority along with consent by half of the states. So these are the three methods of amending a constitution. So when you take up simple majority method, certain parts of the constitution can be amended by a simple majority through general legislative process of the parliament. So both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are included in it. And if half of the total members of the parliament agree for the amendment, for example, qualifications that are necessary for citizenship of India and so on, it becomes an amendment by simple majority. Just half of the total members of the parliament agree for it, then the amendment is taken into consideration. Okay. Then amendment by simple majority. Here certain parts of the constitution can be amended by simple majority consent, special majority consent to the members of the parliament. So here majority means 2/3 members should accept. For example, fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy and other factors. Then when you take the third way of amending it, amendment by special majority along with consent of half of the states. So here both special majority should be there, along with that half of the states consent also should be there. Okay, so that becomes the third method of amending. You're going to learn about these three methods of amending the constitution in detail in your higher classes. But for now, you can just remember the methods of amending it. That's all. So with that, we complete constitutional amendment. Let us now look into the important points to remember. The formal or official changes or modifications made to a constitution is called constitutional amendment. Need for constitutional amendment. The provision of amendment is made in the constitution for including certain changes in accordance with the changing society and situation. Structure of the constitution. The structure of the constitution can be decided based on the amendments. In case the amendment is easy, it is called the flexible constitution, and in case the amendment is difficult, it is called a rigid constitution. This Constitution of India is a combination of both rigid and flexible factors. We'll take up the last chapter of today's class, our defense forces. Protecting our country from the foreign aggression is the primary duty that is given to the defense or the armed forces. Therefore, the role of the defense forces is very, very prominent. It is a matter of pride that India has a disciplined, powerful, and aggressive defense forces. We have efficiently faced several challenges after independence, which disturbed our national integrity. For example, the aggressions by China and Pakistan. Our defense forces have sufficiently displayed that they are ready for any sacrifice during the Kargil military operation. India has about 15,200 kilometers of land border and 7,516.5 kilometers of sea border to protect. Over 40% of the total annual budget is reserved for the Defence Forces of India. Responsibilities of our defence forces: protecting the border areas, safeguarding the integrity of the country, preventing smuggling and such other anti-national activities. So what is an anti-national activity? Any action that threatens peace, security, public order and safety of the people of India. Above all, any action targeting the integrity and unity of India is considered as an anti-national activity. Okay? So the responsibilities of our defense forces are, let us repeat, protecting the border areas, safeguarding the integrity of the country, preventing smuggling and such other anti-national activities. So these are the responsibilities of our defense forces. The supreme power of the defense forces are vested with the President of India. So he is the supreme power of the defense forces. The defense system has three divisions: the Army, Navy and the Air Force. The defense forces of India take part in the Independence Day and Republic Day celebrations of India and display their military strength. So, what are the three divisions of defense forces? Indian Army, Indian Navy and Indian Air Force. These are the three wings of the Indian defense system. The Commander-in-Chief of all the three wings is the President of India. The Army Chief is called the General. The Chief of the Navy is called the Admiral, ADMIRAL, and the Chief of the Air Force is called the Chief Marshal. I repeat, the Chief of the Indian Army is called a General. The Chief of the Indian Navy is known as an Admiral, and the Chief of an Air Force is called the Chief Marshal. Let us now take up the first wing under our defense forces, the Indian Army. The Indian Army is the second largest in the world. The Indian Army is the second largest in the world. The Army comprises of infantry, cavalry, tank regiments called armed corps, gunners regiment or artillery. Now, what is an infantry? They are also known as the foot soldiers. That is, an infantry soldier serves in the field working to defend our country against any threats on the ground. Next is the cavalry. Cavalry are soldiers or warriors who fight mounted on horseback. There are 11 lakh soldiers and 9,60,000 reserve forces in the Army. The service chief of the army is called the general. We have already learnt about this, isn't it? He is responsible for discharging duties related to the control of the force, training, operation, and administration. The head office is based in New Delhi. The army has been rendering valuable humanitarian services during natural calamities such as earthquakes, floods, drought, landslides, whirlwind, etc. The land army, apart from being technically advanced, has also its own spy agency. Let's begin with the second wing of our defense forces, the Indian Navy. The naval forces are necessary for the protection of the islands and coastal lines. The Indian Navy is the sixth largest in the world. Its service chief is known as an admiral, ADMIRAL, admiral. The Indian Navy consists of advanced missile ships and submarines. Among them, INS Vibhuti and INS Godavari are very prominent. Apart from them, INS Virat and INS Vikramaditya are well equipped with fighter aircrafts. The naval base of the Indian Navy is situated in Karwar, which is known as the Seabird. So the important points under Indian Navy is that it protects the islands and the coastal lines. Second, it is the sixth largest in the world. Third point is its service chief is known as an admiral and its headquarters is situated in New Delhi. Then the naval base of the Indian Navy is situated in Karwar, which is known as the Seabird. So these are certain important points that you will remember under Indian Navy. Next, Indian Air Force. That's the third wing of our defense forces. The Indian Air Force is the fifth biggest in the world. Remember, the Indian Air Force is the fifth biggest in the world. Its service chief is called Air Chief Marshal. Its head office is situated in New Delhi. For the administrative convenience, the Indian Air Force is divided into 5 commanding stations. The command stations at Bengaluru, Hyderabad and Dindigul, which is in Tamil Nadu, have important training centers. As a result of the advancement of latest technology, it is equipped with fighter aircrafts to face any eventuality. Our Air Force is equipped with latest fighter aircrafts like Jaguar. The Air Force comprises of 1 lakh airmen and 1,330 fighter aircrafts. The strength of the Air Force is a matter of pride to the countrymen. With that, we complete Directive Principles of State Policy, Constitutional Amendment and our Defense Forces. So let us quickly look into the important points to remember under our Defense Forces. Responsibility of our Defense Forces: protecting the border areas, safeguarding the integrity of the country and preventing smuggling and such other anti-national activities. Next, the Indian defense system has 3 main wings: the Indian Army, the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force. The Commander-in-Chief of all these 3 wings is the President of India. Indian Army. The Indian Army is the second largest in the world. The army comprises of infantry, cavalry, tank regiment called armed corps, gunners or artillery. The service chief of the army is called the general. He is responsible for discharging duties related to the control of the force, training, operation and administration. The head office is based in New Delhi. The army has been rendering valuable humanitarian services during natural calamities such as earthquake, drought, landslides, etc. It also has its own spy agency. Indian Navy. The naval forces are necessary for the protection of the islands and coastal lines. The Indian Navy is the sixth largest in the world. Its service chief is called the Admiral, A-D-M-I-R-A-L, Admiral. Its headquarters is situated in New Delhi. The Indian Navy consists of advanced missile ships and submarines. Among them, INS Vibhuti and INS Godavari are very prominent. Apart from them, INS Virat and INS Vikramaditya are well equipped with fighter aircrafts. The naval base of the Indian Navy is situated in Karwar, which is known as the Seabird. Indian Air Force. The Indian Air Force is the fifth biggest in the world. Its service chief is called the Air Chief Marshal. Its head office is situated in New Delhi. For administrative convenience, the Indian Air Force is divided into 5 commanding stations. At Bengaluru, Hyderabad and Dindigul have the important training centers. Our Air Force is equipped with the latest fighter aircraft like Jaguar. The strength of the Air Force is a matter of pride of the countrymen. Fill in the blanks. The framers of our constitution had a vision of a dash. Second, we should protect dash from pollution by industries and mines. We should protect every dash or place of national importance. Fourth one, minimum wages to workers is a dash principle. Fifth, the structure of the constitution can be decided on the basis of dash. Last one, the dash of India is a combination of both the rigid and flexible factors. Answer the following. Who is given the supreme power of the defense forces? Second one, list the divisions of the defense forces. Third, where is the head office of the Indian Army? Fourth one, name the naval base of the Indian Navy and where is it situated? Next, list the important training centers of the Indian Air Force. Last one, define constitutional amendment. So that is all about the answer the following. Give one word. Protecting the country from foreign aggression is the primary duty of dash. the forces necessary for the protection of the islands and the coastal lines. And the third one, the fifth biggest force in the world. So just give one word for each of the following. We'll move on to the last main. Match the following. You will have to match column B in accordance with column A. With that, we complete today's class. I request you all to kindly complete the assignment on time and also finish your notes. We'll then discuss the answers for these questions in the next session and then begin with a new chapter then. Till then, take care, be safe. Thank you. Have a nice day.